What was it, about 2 weeks ago now?
Yeah.
We went and toured the Advanced Armament Company, or I'm sorry,
We went down for a week basically
Yeah.
to tour all of PSA's.
all of PSA. And under PSA now is America's Ammo Company, which is abbreviated AAC, which is confusing because they also own Advanced Armament Company, also typically known as AAC. But anyway, so they're using the AAC moniker for their ammo. We got to tour that facility, and that is the first time I've ever, I've seen peaks and kind of, we've all seen the videos behind the scenes, but it's the first time I've seen it firsthand they manufacture everything from the primers to, they stretch the casings, they
start with
melt the
little
lead.
brass cups
Yep.
that turn into a complete casing that's gone through multiple heat treat processes, multiple machining ops, everything.
So that was the crazy thing. AAC is making almost every component of that thing in-house. That was really cool to see. So I guess we'll just kind of walk them through what we saw because we got like a step-by-step tour of this place. And probably one of the top 5 experiences I've had in my life, much less like in the industry. It's like top 1 or 2 in the industry. Just because it's like you shoot so much ammo over your life, you're like, where does it all come from? How's it made? And to see this massive facility stood up.
After doing that, the first thing I said was, I'm never going to complain about the price of ammo again.
He lied. But
that lasted like a week.
He'll still complain about the price, but he'll understand. Like it's easier to understand why ammo is so expensive.
Yeah.
But so of course each caliber has a little bit different process. I think we saw 9mm being made, 308 being made,
5.56.
5.56 being made.
I think maybe 380 or
No, well maybe.
or
I don't
there were
remember.
components for 380 being made.
Oh, the coils.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get into that. But yeah, those were marked 380. I remember those. The lead coils were marked for 380.
I think we saw the bullets in.
Yeah. So it was really cool because when we first walked in, we got to see like them packaging final ammo and putting it in cases and palleting it. That's really the end process. When we walked past that, we got to the actual facility where it started as just little cups. They were 308, and they extracted them out.
Yeah, they started with like almost like lipstick looking tube things for the 308, but then for the 9mm, 5.56, they have more complete processes for their high. They have complete lines set up that just run 9mm and 5.56.
Yep.
Whereas their other calibers, they have to switch out equipment because the volume doesn't justify keeping a line set up 100% of the time for that ammo. So
well, and two, it depends on the tip of the ammo. But this is like we're starting at the base. Like this is just the casings. So they extrude those casings out of those little preformed cups, and it goes through several different processes before it eventually just looks like a little hollow tube, and each one goes through like a chemical cleaning bath or whatever
between each stage.
Yeah, between each stage, and that's the one thing I didn't realize that. So like each time they do something, extrude that case, heat it up. I mean, it's got to go through a different
and then the quality
cleaning process
control. So that it goes through multiple. They're basically punching, and they can't punch it all in one punch because you'll get the material too thin or too thick in certain areas. So they do multiple stages of that. And with the 308s, they had to change machines, if I don't remember correctly. Whereas with the 5.56, they had one machine that just progressively.
Yeah, the 308, I kind of understand now more why 308 is more expensive. It does go through more. I mean, it's still a necked cartridge.
More hands touch it.
But yeah, it has to be touched by a human more times than 5.56. 5.56, they've got a more automated process.
And a lot of that thing is related to volume, though, too. Like
that's true. You're selling way more 5.56 than 308.
It was very apparent, though, when you saw the raw materials and stuff. You're like, something like 380 obviously has less raw materials than 9mm. But
to tool it up.
Correct. And they just don't have the volume and demand to make it. So they're having to spend a lot of time switching out the tooling on everything.
Yeah, and one of the steps of those 308s was they had to create the primer cavity.
Yeah.
So they had to punch it out. And somewhere in that process, they also did the head stamp for the 308. But it was cool to see a cartridge with a punch, like they punched a hole in it, and then they actually had to punch the hole for the primer. Like they punched a hole for the primer, but then they had to punch a hole through that hole to get into the main casing. So when the primer ignited, it ignited the powder.
And I was looking at it, I'm like, why can't they do this in one step? Because it was 2 separate steps. But then I remember, I forgot what it was, but there was something in that process that clicked to me. I'm like, they could, but the complications it would create along the way just aren't worth it.
But then it was cool because then the next process was it fed it into the machine, and I have a slow-mo, which I'll roll over now, of it cutting the actual extraction groove of the round. And so then you see the casing really start to take shape. And after that process, you had the hole punch for the primer. You had the hole punched through the primer hole to get to the powder. And then you had the head stamp and you had the extraction groove. Now you have a casing. You have a casing that's ready to basically go.
And I remember talking to the operator at that machine. He was checking with a go, no-go gauge every probably, like, it seemed like 40 or 50 rounds. He was checking one to make sure. And then if something's out of spec, they shut the machine down and they check, what they just did. And then they check the other one, see if they need to switch out any tooling or what goes on. That guy, talking to him, he said he'd been probably in his 50s and he'd been reloading his whole life. Like, a lot of the employees there are not just there for a day job.
That are running it
what they're doing.
Have been in the industry for a very long time. Have been in the ammo specifically industry for a very long time.
These people have literally gotten out of school, dedicated their entire life
to ammo specifically, not just firearms, ammo. But so PSA is in really good hands, or AAC is in very good hands. A lot of people want to talk about quality. But I think anytime you stand up an ammo manufacturing facility, you're going to have problems. We have problems with PMC. We have had problems with Remington rounds. You're gonna have issues somewhere along the line if you shoot enough. If you don't shoot enough, well, you might not have a problem.
Yeah.
But anyway, so one thing that was cool, and this is kind of switching from 308 to 5.56, was I learned why the rounds on 5.56 always look tarnished. Like, they always look, from the neck down, they're always a different color. Well, that's from the heating process to neck the cartridge down.
And they do that for every bottlenecked cartridge.
They do. But so to get rid of that tarnished look, they have an acid bath or a solution bath that would then clean that up, and it would give it that clean brass casing.
And the 308s were all clean because
they were
it was
all clean,
deemed higher quality ammo or whatnot.
Correct. But the average 5.56, you get some that look great. You get some that have that tarnished look. Well, all that means is either went through the acid bath, which is an extra step, which means it'll cost more, or it didn't. So getting it looking like that just means they didn't do that one step. Doesn't affect
it's a cosmetic.
It's a cosmetic only thing. But they heat that neck up.
And didn't they say that if you left it in the acid bath too long or something, like, then you had?
Well, see, that was the other thing, is like the metallurgy of the round, or of the casings. One of the really cool things when we went to the QC part of that, where they cut the casing in half and tested the hardness, and they looked at some other stuff. It was really sciencey. It was way over my head.
I understood most of what they were doing. They were basically X-raying it to look to see if everything was in proportion.
Yeah, and it was really cool because they told us about all the QC, and I would be doing them a disservice if I try to regurgitate it. But they really are focused on QC, and so they will take several during the shift, and then at the end of and start of any shift, they take casings off the line and examine them.
Lot numbers, not just, they do it shifts, and then they also do extra when they switch out lots.
Yes. Yep. And then after the QC from that final stage, they go into the actual brass casings get primered. So they have a whole room that's just dedicated to primers, and it's separate. It's a separate room from everything else that gets the primer facility, and they're just chugging away. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's 24-hour. They said.
Yeah, they run 2 12-hour shifts.
Yeah, two 12-hour shifts. So, they're absolutely killing it. So that was basically the start of it from the actual cartridges to the actual bullet manufacturing stage, because they're done with that casing. It's primed. It's ready to go.
Yeah.
So now you have to go to the bullet manufacturing, and they're actually melting the lead core of the bullet.
They get big lead bars, ingots.
Huge bars.
And so when we walked in, we saw them packaging the ammo. They just had warehouse
Yeah, they had a lot of raw material.
Yeah, and it's lead, rolls of copper, brass.
And at this point, when we first walked in, we had no idea what we were walking. And then finally, it all starts to come together as you walk through the facility. But like when we got to the lead where they were melting it, it's this huge iron bar, and we're like, well, first we saw the massive coils, the ones for the 380s. So what it does, they take those big bars and they melt it into a rod shape, and then they heat it up and extrude that rod into these coils, and then those coils are fed into the
But they have to
machines.
be careful with the coils because they cannot sit. If they sit 7 days, they start settling enough because the lead's so heavy, and then they can't use it. So, and I don't think they have a way to melt them back into the lead ingots and then put them into the cylinders. No. So they have to be careful to keep their production at the right level that they can process that.
And that was interesting because they said there's a way that they could bundle those coils to where they didn't do that, but they said they were moving through them so fast that there was no point. So they put them on a pallet. Forklift comes in, moves that pallet to the next stage, which is a machine that literally cuts the bullet out of the coil. So it brings it in, cuts the bullet, and then in that very same area, it was interesting that happened, and then they fed those bullets into the other machine that had the copper coils.
Yep, and that's what creates the jacket.
Yep. So, and it's a very interesting process because it's like 4 or 5 stages that the bullet goes through before the copper jacket is completely wrapped around it. And I think at the time it was either 10 millimeter or 45 that they were doing the bullets for.
I think it was 45.
Yeah, it may have been.
It doesn't really matter.
It's all the same process pretty much. But it was really cool to watch the copper, the coils come off and then it to go and turn into a bullet in this machine, and it just kicks it out.
And like the brass casings, they had multiple punching processes to get that jacket to the point to where they put the lead in it. And I think, did they shape the lead? I think the lead had also the process where they shaped it before it.
So that they went into that one machine, which we thought shaped it, but it didn't. It just cuts it into little things. And then once it puts it into the big press machine where the copper coils fed into, it would actually shape the bullet itself. And then the next step, it would put the copper over it. And then I don't remember the exact process, but it shaped it and put the copper on it in the 5-step machine. Yeah. But then, of course, all like that, that's the 2 major components. And then they have to come together, and that was when we went into the loading room. Which again, this was wild.
They had multiple different lines set up. They had one main for 1 or 2 for 5.56, and then they had I think 2 for 9 mil.
Yeah. So they had, So, and it was interesting because if you notice there was several lines in there. They were running 308, but they were doing different 308 bullet tips.
Yes, and the 308 was also run on those progressive. Think of a massive version of like a Dillon turret press.
Yes.
Whereas
these others were more like you'd think a Henry Ford style production line.
And I think they were saying that they'll still load 5.56 on those turret machines, but it's more of like their Sierra Match King,
their black tip,
Barnes
stuff
TSX,
like that. But it was cool because we got the full video of the 5.56 loading process. And so they started with these silver trays, and they had shakers, and so they just put loads. They just scoop up massive loads of. First, it was the casings. The first stage was, of course, getting the casings prepped.
On one, they've got the machines almost like a U.
Yep.
And on one side, they've got a tray, and it's for the bullets, and the other side, they've got a tray for the brass casings.
Yeah. But it starts with the brass casings, and then it goes through the process, and it goes through several things. One opens up the feed neck, or the neck just a little bit for the bullet to set. But then the next stage, it would go, and they'd pump in the powder.
Back, what was amazing was each one of those trays, I think, held, or at least for the 5.56, I'm not sure on the 9 mil, held 200 rounds. And it'd shake the brass cases in, but it only seemed to get about 90%. And the operator had to
put it in by hand.
There's a lot of hands-on processes with this. And so they do that, and then it'd go to the next stages. Yeah,
so it started with you're talking about the shaker, and they had to fill in the holes that didn't get filled. And then it would get I think that first one kind of opened up the neck just a little bit to prepare for powder charge load, and then also the bullet to be put in and set and crimped. But the next stage would be your powder load. that was a wildly messy process. But it would powder load all of them at one time, and then it would go on to the next. There was some stage there. Can't remember what that did exactly, but each one, it came down on that process. The next went to the next shaker, which would be the, he's putting in the actual bullet tips themselves. Then they would put that on top of it and then slid it into the next, which I think actually set the bullet. Then they slid it on down to the crimper. And I remember this because I was taking the video and it's like crimper, or it said like crimper 3. I don't remember what it said, but it specifically on the machine said crimper. So I was like, oh, that's going to be easy to remember. But it crimps the bullet on. Then it goes on to the QC guy, he basically turns it over, and I think it's a chamber check. That's what they called it. So if any of them stood up, that means it's a no-go, and they ditch the whole batch. But in between all that, we did go see the test firing and all of the like SAMI stuff that they had to do, which that was really cool because that's where we saw the 7.62x39 steel case being tested. There's been a lot of videos coming out on it now, so it's no big hairy secret. But it wasn't a secret then. In fact, Josiah was like, "Hey,
make sure you get this." Yeah.
But yeah, it was cool because they were clearly processing it, and then in fact, the armory had all the guns that they were trying it with.
And we both, I think, us and Brad expect to walk in there and just see PSA AKs, ARs. All the PSA products, and they did have one of kind of every caliber they made a PSA product in there. But the most impressive thing to me was they had pretty much every current 7.62x39 that's on the market, and including a few legacy. Like they had a Colt, 7.62x39 AR, which is a pretty.
They have something.
They haven't made those since like the 90s. Yeah, then an HK. Well, that was in 308.
Oh, that was.
They had a legit HK91 because they wanted to test 308 with the fluted chamber. They were doing lots of testing on that because anybody that knows HKs, that's a different system, and getting that to run reliably, making air for that's a little bit different than using an AR-10 that has a more standard chamber.
Yeah.
But they're spending some serious money on the guns. What do they have? SIG MCX, a Ruger Mini 30, maybe like a PWS 7.62x39 or something. They had 7 or 8,
and they were going to shoot something crazy amount, like 10,000 rounds through each gun or something.
It was 5 or 10,000. Yeah. I think it was 5 through each gun. They had 10. Yeah, because it was 50,000 rounds for this round of testing.
Yeah, this batch, So, and that was all steel case 7.62x39, but they also test the pressures, and I didn't actually get any video of the testing stuff because some of the stuff we could see and use, some of it we could not see and use, but some of it we could record and show, some of it we couldn't.
Yeah, the pressure testing, I'll be honest, that's way out of our...
Way over my head. But yeah, they pressure test. They also test for accuracy of each batch. And the test ranges themselves were pretty impressive. I mean, they were, proprietary, like firing stuff with the barrels and all that.
That's kind of what I expected.
Yeah.
But what was cool was the 100-yard range. So they had ranges in there were pretty much mag dump ranges, I'll call them, where that's where they're going to test the 50,000 rounds.
Yep.
And then they had the quality control ranges where they go and they take the 9mm, it goes into a barrel about 3 inches thick and 10 inches long or whatever it is, and 308 rifles, like a 26-inch, I think they said, is SAMI spec.
I think so.
So this is all the stuff that's set up by SAMI. They put in there. They had a 100-yard range, though, where they had to extend it past the end of the factory. Remember they were talking about.
And it's cool because when we went back downstairs, I realized what that giant tube was. I was like, that's the shooting range. So it's really cool. It was really cool to see that and how much they're actually QCing, R&Ding, and testing.
They're putting a crap ton of ammo out, too. And they weren't even at full capacity by far.
No, they're still standing up. And I think that ammo is currently at Metro, and I think it's eventually going to take over all of Metro, which right now Metro handles fulfillment as well, which we'll cover in a minute. But the whole facility should be ammo before it's all said and done. They do have a primer facility. To my knowledge, they don't let anybody in there for probably safety reasons. So if somebody's been in, cool. But we didn't get to go.
Yeah.
But did get to look outside. I mean, just stand outside of it. But I can understand why they'd keep that pretty locked down. That's
And they've got the primer facility over there. They had the powder magazine, separate because of
totally separate. They had to. And then finally, like once it was all said and done, they had them packaged up. Once the rounds were complete, at least the 5.56. Now the 308 was loaded by hand into the boxes.
So 308 was loaded by hand. 5.56 and 300 blackout they could load on the same machine, and you've got a lot of video footage of how that worked.
Basically, the boxes, everything is kind of automated at that point. They just feed the machine the rounds. The rounds are then kind of how you get them.
They orientate
the rounds,
slide
them in the box. Once they do that, they get enough of the individual boxes because they come packaged in boxes of 20, and then the cases are stood up by the machine, and then they're pushed into the case. Case comes around, and the old Josiah robot just reaches over there and just sucks that thing up and puts it down.
Yeah, they were picking cardboard up with suction cups,
and
you know what a case of ammo weighs. It's
and it would
impressive.
like precisely just put it down onto the pallet, and they just stack pallets of ammo. But I mean that honestly, that was one of the coolest things I think I've seen in a long time as far as manufacturing goes.
The crazy thing to me was to see how automated certain processes were, while others were still very hands-on.
Yeah, I didn't expect as much hands-on as there was, but it's still.
And so, like the machines where they go, or the line where they do 200 rounds a time, they were telling me the difference in numbers, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, versus the progressive loading machines. You see one of those, I mean, it looks like a bullet's being spit out, 2 to 3 bullets a second or 1 bullet a second, whatever it is. You just see round, drop, drop, drop consistently. And it looks about as fast as the 200 when you see it, but then when you realize there's 200 per tray, there's a massive amount of ammo coming off those lines. It's
wild.
It's a whole different level.
So that kind of wraps up the AAC, tour. And again, Metro
split into 3. Fulfillment is split into 2. So
fulfillment split into 2, but I'll lump fulfillment into just one. But it's kind of just fulfillment and the ammo plant right now. But apparently, fulfillment's going to be moved to another facility, and ammo is going to take that whole thing eventually. Which will be awesome because that means we'll have 7.62 dedicated lines, probably 5.45. All of the calibers that you really want.
They say 5.45 is coming, but we could only verify 7.62 by 39 because we saw it.
I would say 7.62 by 39 steel case is imminent.
It's gonna drop and we're
imminent.
Not gonna.
It could be out before this video is. I don't know, but it's
I
close.
think they're just gonna drop it when nobody expects it though. Because I do think they're really
they teased it yesterday.
Yeah,
they literally teased so I think we're within days, if not. I mean, we might be weeks, but I say less than 60 days for sure.
I'd agree with that.
But that's not some kind of insider knowledge. That's just my assumption.
That's a guess.
They were real, they were hard on it.
Yeah,
testing, and as long as that testing went right, and even if it didn't, they would just fix what they were doing. And retest.
It should run in your SIG MCX 7.62 by 39. It should run in your Mini 30.
And any AK you've got.
Yeah, not just your PSA builds.
So that kind of wraps up, I would say, day